Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Food Freedom series brought to you by Freedom Kitchen. This is a 6-part series, and I hope that you will join me for all 6 parts, not just for me, but for you and for your family. Let's jump right in here. All right, so Freedom Kitchen presents A Fork in the Road. We are at a fork in the road. This is a time of we're setting precedents. And what I am challenging everyone to do is to choose creativity over convenience. And you'll see why as we go through this presentation. So this Food Freedom series is 6 parts. And in the first part, I want to paint a picture about where we're at today and how we got here. And yes, it has a lot to do with capitalism, but maybe we've taken capitalism too far. So we're going to talk about capitalism and government control, but it's really just to paint a picture of where are we at today with our food supply. In session 2, we're going to talk about our kids, and I'll touch upon our kids in this session, but in session 2, we'll go deep and we'll talk about what is affecting our kids and how we can turn that around. And in session 3, we're going to go deep into addiction. And again, I'll touch on that in this session, but we're going to go deep on that in session 3. And if you think addiction doesn't affect you or your family or anyone you know, then I strongly encourage you to tune in to that session. And then in session 4, we're going to go deep into toxicity. And this is something that's near and dear to me. I've been teaching detoxification for 14 years. I've had a number of articles written about me as a detoxification expert long before most people were talking about detox. In session 5, we're going to talk about bugs, and this is going to be a fun one because there's a lot of misconceptions about bugs, and not all bugs are created equal. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we're going to address them all. And then in session 6, we'll go deep into solutions. Now, I'm going to talk about solutions throughout the whole 6-part series, but in session 6, it will be completely dedicated to solutions and things that you can do immediately for you and your family. So this workshop is active. It's not passive. Passivity is what got us here. The views expressed in this presentation are my own. However, it isn't about me. It's about you. The material presented may cause cognitive dissonance. So I encourage you to do your own research. I welcome other views if they are not rooted in denial, because we are at a fork in the road, and this is no time for the status quo. It's time for creativity. So where does our food come from? When I ask kids this question, I get the answer, the grocery store. This is how far we've gotten from the truth, because our food comes from the earth, and we need to remember. We need to remember who we are and what our body needs. Our body needs food that is grown in soil and that has sunshine on it. So it either needs to grow in the ground or it needs to graze and eat the foods that grow in the ground. And processed food strips all nutrients from our food. They're food-like substances, but they are not food. And our food doesn't really come from the grocery store, and we may not want to depend on the grocery stores. So what if everything that we've been told is wrong? This was the cognitive dissonance that I had as I started studying nutrition 14 or 15 years ago in response to my own health challenges. So I always play this game when I speak to audiences, and I say, what's the most important meal of the day? And everyone says breakfast. And I say high fat causes, and everyone says heart disease. And I say eating more frequently helps, and people say boost our metabolism. This game is an illustration to show you how conditioned we have become, and that things have been repeated enough times that we all repeat those lines without critically thinking about the impact or the truth of these statements. So I don't know what came to your mind when I said those statements, but resoundingly, when I speak to rooms, I always get those answers. So the problem that we have, the first problem that we have that we're going to address today, is that we're looking to an expert that is outside of us. We stopped thinking for ourselves and we started deferring to experts. This was conditioning, and this conditioning began in childhood. This began with well-child checkups, leading us to believe that the doctor knew best. And as a child, we look to our parents, we look to our teachers, then we look to our bosses, and we grow up, we look to the government. And all of this conditioning is intended to disrupt our ability to critically think. So the first thing I want to say is it's not your fault. And now we're going to change that. I'm going to plant some seeds today to get you thinking. We're going to start breaking down the myths. And again, you may or may not understand these. They may or may not resonate with you at this time, but we're going to plant some seeds that much of what we have been told has been conditioning, and we'll get into where that comes from, the who and the why. So the first myth is the germ theory versus the terrain theory. And this germ theory made us afraid of germs, made us afraid of bugs, all bugs. And that made us think that all bugs were bad, all bugs were created equal, and that we didn't need any bugs, and entered the era of antibiotics, which not only wipes out the bad bacteria, but wipes out the good bacteria. That in and of itself might not have been so bad if we didn't go to hand sanitizer and every other kind of antibacterial, because in the process of doing that, we have killed our good bacteria as well, and it has disrupted our microbiome in our gut, which is the terrain that we're talking about in the terrain theory. So what if what we were told was wrong? Or maybe we just took it to an extreme. This led to the need for pasteurization because we were afraid of the bugs. We were afraid of any bacteria in our milk, except that the way God intended was raw milk, which has live enzymes in it. Do you know that lactose intolerance really didn't develop until we killed the lactase, which is the enzyme needed to digest the lactose? Do you see how, as we have interfered in our food system, we have created resulting problems? Here's another one. Eating more frequently boosts metabolism. I know we've heard this one, right? Eat 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day, no, 6 small meals a day. Maybe we should just graze all day. The problem with that is here in the Western Hemisphere, we have more of a problem with overconsumption and type 2 diabetes, and less of a concern about starvation. And eating more frequently actually produces excess insulin, because again, we're also eating a lot of processed foods that are high in sugar and carbohydrates. So they're just going to continually produce more glucose and more insulin. So this is a myth. This myth was created for us to eat more frequently and spend more money. We've also been taught that salt is bad for us. I have so many clients afraid of salt, yet we turn around and buy Gatorade. So the same people that told us salt is bad for us sell us salt in colored water called Gatorade. So we have to critically think here. We actually need salt. I'm not saying an excess of salt, but we need salt. And we do buy salt for our electrolytes. maybe we can just make our own electrolytes. That's all it takes. Some sea salt, Himalayan salt, we can make our own electrolytes. Fluoride in our water is for our dental health. Here's another myth. Fluoride only works on our teeth when applied directly to our teeth. And research actually shows that when dental health improved was when more communities had access to clean water, not fluoridated water, just clean water. And so fluoride really had nothing to do with that. Some more myths. Fat is bad and causes heart disease. You know, my dad was put on a low-fat diet for high cholesterol when he was 36 and I was 10. And by age 18, because our family went low fat and we were low fat, high carb Italian family. So by age 18, my triglycerides were too high. That's what happens when we take fat away. This need for more whole grains, or this misconception that we need more whole grains when whole grains turn to sugar, that was the exact problem that I had, which led to high triglycerides and type 2 diabetes. So these are myths and may not be true. Every individual is different. We'll get into that. There's no one size fits all diet or recommendation. We have to eat according to our body type. But these are myths that we hear continually repeated in media. One we're hearing now is that cows are the biggest contributor to climate change. Boy, we keep hearing that from the people who are flying private jets all over the world. What about grain-fed beef is better than grass-fed? And of course, there's the myth that, well, glyphosate is to increase crop yield, and it only affects the insects, not us. Who is telling us this? This is where it gets interesting. You may or may not have seen this video, but I'm going to play it. It's only about 1.5 minutes for you to gain some perspective on this.
Headley. And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about some of the trending irresponsible, one-sided stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media platforms push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Headley.
And I'm Ryan.
Okay, so that video is to illustrate for you where we're getting this conditioning. Now, who is providing the information to all of the media outlets that they seem to be repeating the same stories? Well, this image shows us, here's where we get into a bit of capitalism. Capitalism's good. It allows me to be self-employed, right? But when it becomes more of a monopoly, we have to be concerned. Or when we've had such a consolidation at the top, And there's so much control that it's imbalanced. And so I share this image. I did not create this image. And there was a wonderful blogger who did. I need to make sure I get her credits on here. That shows how very few companies are controlling all of the brands, basically, that we're buying in the grocery store. Now, to make matters worse, even since this graphic was created, many have uncovered that at the very top, it's two companies called Vanguard and BlackRock. So Vanguard and BlackRock, they have their hands in everything. And so at the very top, when we look at the board of directors, or who owns the majority shares in these companies, they also own the majority shares in the chemical companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies. So when we question why would they want to make us sick, right? I've had people ask me this question in my classes. Well, first and foremost, it's about making money. And so they have to cheapen the product in order to increase the margin. But more nefarious than that, we're going to see why we're confused and why they're keeping us confused. Okay, so this article here in the Detroit Free Press compares every diet, noting the pros and ending on the cons. In surveying clients of mine and audiences where I've spoken, it leaves them more confused. A confused mind can't change because there's too much energy that's expended on confusion. So I want you to think about that for a minute. It's the reason I'm doing this series. We need to limit the confusion because we need clarity. I even wrote an ebook on this called From Confusion to Clarity, because if we're confused, we can't change. So who is continuing to perpetuate the confusion? Well, here's a meme, an infographic that I found circulating on Facebook. This says, what's the difference? Grain finished or grass finished beef? And it goes through and it lists out, there's more protein in grain finished and there's more zinc, and grain finished beef has lower carbon footprint, which doesn't make much sense because we have to grow the grain versus grass fed, and grass grows naturally, and grass is actually great for the environment. So this was a very confusing infographic, but I had friends of mine who were circulating this, believing that grain finished was better. And I looked up the infographic was created by this Allison here, who happens to be the livestock marketing coordinator for Merck. So why would Merck, a pharmaceutical company, be creating infographics or marketing materials? Why would they even have a livestock marketing position? What does Merck have to do with livestock? But these are the types of things that require critical thinking. If we study regenerative agriculture, and we're going to get into that more in session 6, when we start studying regenerative agriculture, we know that cows need to graze the land. We need the manure. Just think about if you plant a garden at home, you go and buy manure. There is a cycle that nature created. And when we honor that cycle, it's best for all of us. So all of this causes confusion. This is another good one. Okay, so there's a story behind this, but this article was shared with my students. And when I read it, I was very confused because similar to that Detroit Free Press article, this article was not very clear, almost intentionally attempting to confuse. And when I looked up Priceonomics, they are a marketing company that does nothing but promote or create content for big brands just so that they can blast content out all over the internet. That content may be controversial, it's contradictory, but that's part of the confusion plan, right? Confusion is created by contradictory information. And this is why when my students come to me, they're like, I'm so confused. look at every other animal in nature. They are not confused about what to eat. We are the only ones who have become confused. This is when, as Sadhguru would say, our intelligence is working against us because we're overthinking things that our body knows naturally and intuitively. Okay, so I'm not going to share this article because it's not worth it, but I wanted to show that this is how confusion continues to perpetuate. There are actually content machines that all these companies do is spin content and put it out on the internet, and part of their goal is actually controversy. So now we have the second problem, and that's division. So we were conditioned to listen to experts. So we're looking outside of ourselves, and now that gets exploited intentionally to cause confusion. Division is really the goal, and gaslighting is common. When we're divided with our neighbor, then we're really not ever looking at the root cause of the problem. And we're not coming together to create solutions or to honor each other's choices. Like I may have a carnivore neighbor and a vegan neighbor, and I can completely honor their choices, and we can still work together to have a neighborhood garden. We could potentially, raise an animal here in the neighborhood for those that want it. This is why we need to come together. But when we're divided, we're all looking to a different expert. No one can stand in their own power, and we can't honor anyone else. And so some of that is with the diet debate, right? Paleo versus keto. Okay, that one's not, drastically different. But then we get into the diet debate with added morality, like vegan versus carnivore. And I'm just going to say this. I have been coaching for 14 years, and there is no one size fits all diet. Trust me, if there was, I would be like shouting it from the rooftops. And at different times, different things have worked for me. So, I did juicing. I've done a bone broth cleanse. I've needed protein. I need more protein now than what I am getting. So we have to honor our body, and our body changes. And so if anyone tells you that something is the best diet, please run, because they don't live in your body and they can't tell you what's best for your body, which is why I guide people through a process for them to determine what's right for them. It really requires an elimination protocol, implementing detoxification methods, and then navigating the needs of your body, which we do that in a structured format to find what your body needs. But to try to pigeonhole yourself into a diet, it's like that game. I need a picture of that game. When you were a kid and you had the square pegs and the round pegs and you hammered them in, and you tried to hammer the square peg into the round hole and it didn't go. This is what we're doing with trying to pick a diet. I just recently spoke to a potential client who said after all the research, he and his wife were thinking they were going Mediterranean. Listen, if you're not from the Mediterranean, that may not work for you, and probably the same diet isn't going to work for both of them. So, we all need some different things and need to modify. All right, but this is about division. We'll get into diet later. Where else do we see division? Do you realize that everything in our country, at least, has been divided? So you see my freedom is colored purple because I'm hoping for us to unite regardless of political views. There's some things that we all need to be united on, and hopefully soon. So we're going to listen to this little video from Neethi as she explains why.
It was a divide and conquer, art of war style attack on family. And it's very, very important for people to know this because when we talk about the food church, I was telling Lisa, I said, for me to talk about how and why I did the food church, then this is a very important piece to understand first. Divide and conquer.
Okay, so we heard Neethi say the divide and conquer, the division. This was intentional. So many things that are fueled in the media. Remember, let's go back to the media. We know that the stories that they're sharing are the same stories across the board, and they're fueling or fanning the flames. I mean, they're fueling the fire and they're fanning the flames and they're creating division. And that division is an art of war style, divide and conquer. And I want to show you how much, to what extent they go through now to manipulate. If you don't believe that this is possible, to add to the confusion, food companies have set out to create addictive food-like substances to capture more market share. Well, in order to capture more market share, they need more people, and they need those people to buy more. So addiction research by Dr. Joan Ifland proves, which I think many of us know, that processed foods are addictive, but her research is unparalleled in this space. And she's able to prove that before big tobacco took over the processed food companies in the 80s, we were eating real food. But big tobacco actually applied a business model known as the modern industrial epidemic of addiction model. This was the plan. It is a business model. So I want you to hear that again. Did the food companies set out to put chemicals and addictive poisons in our food intentionally when they applied their business model known as the modern industrial epidemic of addiction model? So Dr. Joan was able to find that in 1985, R.J. Reynolds bought 85% of Nabisco. Philip Morris bought General Foods and Kraft Foods in 1988. And Philip Morris controlled 10% of the American food purchases. The tobacco industry had gotten a hold of the food industry and applied their business model that they had applied to cigarettes. Now, this makes sense because sales of cigarettes were declining, but they knew there was a lot more opportunity in the food space. Addiction epidemics rely on the 5 A's of neuromarketing. The first of those being to teach the brain to crave. So an addictive product formulation, advertising, age, the younger the better, availability, and affordability. Now we're going to talk more about kids in session 2. And how this has affected them. But the tobacco industry added sugar and other additives that they're not required to label. Hunger, they determined, does not sell snacks. Desire does. So Howard Moskowitz actually mastered sugar addiction. He measured and increased our cravings for sugar and calculated a bliss point. Adam Dranowski found fat cravings are insatiable, and the Monell Chemical Center found salt addiction can be taught. I want you to understand that these foods are highly addictive. Sugar has been proven, right? We've all heard about the studies with rats. Give the rat a choice over sugar or cocaine, and they pick sugar. Sugar activates the L-DOPA pathway, and dopamine is actually named after this substance. Flour sets off serotonin, and gluten attaches to the opiate receptors. Excessive salt and dairy also activate the opiate receptors. This is for all my clients who tell me that they love cheese. Oh, they just love cheese. Here's why. It activates the opiate receptors. Processed fats have the same effect as cannabis, and caffeine wakes up dopamine. There's going to be more on addiction in session 3 of this series, but let's get a primer here with Dr. Joan Ifland.
In the 1980s, when the tobacco company took over processed foods. And we all know that tobacco is about addiction. They have a business model that uses addiction. How does this work? Well, tobacco put emotional triggers on TV on children for processed foods. It's the tobacco industry now running processed foods and making processed foods addictive, and then putting triggers for processed foods and stressful emotions on TV. Hundreds and hundreds of commercials on cartoon programs, Saturday morning cartoon programs. So the children began to associate stress with processed foods. That's where it began, and it's just wicked. But the tobacco industry did that, but they did. So now we know by 1997, Americans are eating a pound per person per day of processed foods. This is high fructose corn syrup and sugar. It's flour containing gluten, and it's corn flour. It's high-fat dairy, and it's French fries. A pound per person per day of substances being sold as food that are actually drugs that cause negative emotions. So we have these epidemics. We know that cancer, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, memory loss, and learning disabilities are associated with processed foods. But I don't think most people know that depression, irritability, anxiety, and even shame are chemical reactions to this pound per person per day. So this is why we have epidemics of depression, we have epidemics of raging, we have epidemics of anxiety and panic disorders. It's because of the introduction of these processed foods into American culture in the 1980s by the tobacco industry. So who did this? How did it happen? Well, one particular consultant, Howie Moskowitz, who's Harvard-trained PhD in psychology of marketing, created a data-intense process by which he could maximize the amount of sugar, fat, and salt in food, in processed foods. So he maxed out these highly addictive, mood-altering, depressing, anxiety-inducing substances. He just filled up processed foods with these substances that create these negative emotions. So in the night.
Okay, so there we heard Dr. Jo Nifland, and we're going to hear a lot more from her in session number 3, because this affects every single person in our lives. And with the food shortages predicted, this is the first thing that we want to address, is any addictions, attachments, and potentially any withdrawal. Okay, more on that in session 3. So you heard Dr. Jo Nifland share her research on intentional addictive additives, but cancer causing? She mentioned cancer, but here's Jeff Bragg, a potato scientist who's on a mission to educate more people on his experience working in big agriculture with firsthand knowledge as a potato scientist.
At certain fast food restaurants created a cancer-causing agent called acrylamides. And lo and behold, for years, they didn't tell anybody that they were paying the California Proposition 65 to keep them out of trouble. Certain fast food.
Okay, so what chemicals are we talking about here? So I mentioned for this problem number 3, manipulation. We are being manipulated. So I have compiled a list of chemicals that is found in food, processed food. You can get it now, and you can also sign up there on my website to stay up to date on all of the events with Freedom Kitchen. So you can go to freedomkitchensummit.com/free-from. We want to be free from these chemicals, which means we probably need to be free from all processed food. I know my family thinks I have taken this maybe too far. I'm very vigilant about eating no processed food. And this is why. So let's just look at one chemical. Let's just look at food dye. And we're going to go into some more detail for sure in sessions 2 and 3, but let's just hear what one chemical can do to us or our kids in this case.
Well, I have found that food is the #1 factor to behavioral issues. And that's not what most people think of when they see, their son acting up. When one man saw his son punching holes in walls, he did not understand what was going on for the longest time. And eventually, when he was reading about different things, he saw something about food dyes, right, in foods, and red food dyes in particular. And then he noticed one day that after grandma came to visit and gave him one of those strawberry ice creams from the ice cream truck, his son was punching holes in walls again. And so he realized that food is a major contributing factor to his son's behavioral issues. And when he eliminated that red food dye, his son never punched holes in walls again.
Is what happens when you add the food color. So I went deeper into the nutritional science because that is what I practice, right, Lisa? So I studied that when that food color is added to that cake or that protein, which is there in that cake, what happens is that protein changes the structure. So what happens is normal protein, when you eat that, your body will be able to break it down, digest it, and you'll be fine. But the moment the food color is added, like a pink and orange or yellow, that protein changes the structure. So our body is not able to break it down. And so that protein, for most of us, it will still be okay. We will not react. But for people with low immune tolerance, that will circulate in the body and that will break out as a rash or a food sensitivity.
The color of food tells our brain what types of nutrients and phytonutrients and phytochemicals are in that food. And so there is that natural attraction that we have to colors because it tells our brain that there's a certain type of nourishment coming in. What's interesting about food dye is the word itself, right? Food dye. And so it's literally, toxic and it's in the name itself, right? In the vibrational frequency of the word is the word dye. So we need to just start paying attention again to, the language that we're using around food and what it's doing to it.
Okay, so for more information on some of these other experts that I've been sharing throughout this presentation, you can go to freedomkitchensummit.com. You can go get the free from list, so you can have that list of chemicals posted on your refrigerator. In addition to regular events, I send out a newsletter and valuable resources to families that care. And I say families that care because not everyone cares. Many people are in denial and they're not ready to walk this journey with us. So problem 4, let's talk about consolidation. While the masses have been kept in a stupor of confusion, resources have been consolidated. I mentioned at the top, when you have all of these companies sitting on the boards of directors, or they're the largest shareholder, so they have a lot of say in what happens in the company or the deals that are struck, right? So the chemical companies are providing the same chemicals to the food, to agriculture. So they're using the same chemicals that they spray on the fields, and then they're putting them in our foods, and then they're using chemicals in the pharmaceutical drugs. So you have to look at how it's all connected at the top. And so much of this stuff that's happening at our level is noise, because they hold the power and the control to make those decisions. So while we may all be talking about healthier school lunches for kids, which didn't happen, by the way, that we were all led to believe that a former first lady improved school lunches, they actually had more sugar added to them. So there's a lot of noise at our level, which means we're really at a disadvantage. And so we have to start looking from a business perspective, what's been happening at the top. We're now more than one generation removed from farming and self-sufficiency. We don't know how to be self-sustaining anymore, and we're not teaching it to our kids. Most families are not even cooking every day, and most kids don't know how to cook. And that's why I absolutely love my kids' cooking program, because with them, I am breaking their addiction to the processed foods, and we're focused on creativity over convenience. We have to get them back in the kitchen if we want our kids to survive and thrive. So the problems here are that we lack knowledge, and now we lack resources. We can look at where all the farmland has gone, but there's been a lot of consolidation and ways and means to drive small farmers out of business so that the corporations could buy up all of that land. China's now probably the largest landowner of farmland in our country. I don't know, there seems to be quite a bit of it being bought by foreign entities, government officials. I mean, I think I heard Bill Gates is the largest landowner now in the world. So, but here's what we can expect. This is why it's time for this Food Freedom series and why I need you to share this.
Meat is expected to get even more expensive, and one local farmer says we may soon be facing more serious food shortages.
Some farmers are issuing a warning of a perfect storm of rising prices, supply chain issues, poor planting weather.
Okay, and there's more.
Meat is expected to
Some
get
farmers.
Let's go here.
Most welcome to today's Talk Friday, the 3rd of June. Now, the biggest health threat coming up in the next few months globally, or certainly one of the biggest health threats coming up globally, is going to be famine. There's going to be outright starvation, I'm afraid, in many parts of the world, and we'll be looking at some of the reasons for this. Now, we've been covering a lot of the pandemic on this channel for the last 2.5 years, and officially that's killed 6.3 million people. Now, the real number, of course, is higher. It's going to be 7 or 8 million, maybe even more than that, but the vast majority of those were in the much older age groups, whereas in famine, typically it's children that die first. So,
Children. I want you to hear that.
now the real number, of course, is higher. It's going to be 7 or 8 million, maybe even more than that. But the vast majority of those were in the much older age groups. Whereas in famine, typically it's children that die first. So.
Okay, so what's happening with our food supply? If you haven't been paying attention, there has been a multifaceted approach to destroying our food supply. Maybe some of you can only think about the baby food shortages right now, which I pray for all of the moms and the babies out there. But we have had many food facilities destroyed.
Because it's far outside the realm of statistical probability. In just the last month, more than a dozen food processing plants in this country have been disabled by freak events. 2 of them were hit by planes. The rest caught fire. And it's not just in the last month this has happened. It's been going on for the last year. A disproportionately large number of food processing plants have had unexplained accidents. And then there's this, a new avian virus. More than 27 million chickens and turkeys in this country have been destroyed because of the bird flu epidemic. At the same time, China's been buying up 200,000 acres at least of U.S. farmland. We're not saying all these things are connected, but we're saying their effect is the same, a threat to our food supply. What is going on here?
Okay, you can watch these. There's lots and lots of videos, but it's time for action. So as I start to bring session 1 here to a close, I have debated for some time how to get more information out to more families. I have kids in my cooking program, and I want to make sure that our kids are able to survive and thrive whatever is coming. I talk to them often about how to stock a pantry. We talk about the pandemic pantry. And so there's some, things that you can do. You can start by sharing this webinar because we need to help our friends and our family. The first thing I did was I told all my neighbors, because who's all going to band together? If there's a food shortage, we're going to have to rely on our neighbors. So now is not the time to say, well, you're a carnivore and I'm vegan and I disagree with you. We better find our common ground. Because this is about honoring each other's differences and being neighborly to one another to help us survive and thrive. You can join Freedom Kitchen. Everyone's at a different level of awareness. I've hesitated for some time on how much information to compile and share. But in addition to this Food Freedom series, there's a newsletter, cooking classes, and more events that are planned. Where do we start? Well, sounds so cliche that kids are the future, but the kids are the future. So my work has new meaning for sure in teaching kids how to be self-sufficient. This is Mark Baker. He runs a program called Anyone Can Farm. And this is how I kind of want to wrap up today. I want you to think about the position that he is in and compare that to the position you're in so you can decide what kind of changes you need to make.
I'm right where I want to be. I feel like I'm the luckiest guy alive. And to be able to share the experience of my farming life with others is a privilege. Talking to somebody like you, 10 years ago, nobody wanted to know about farming, but I think it has something to do with the road that we've been on for the last couple of years. Something's woken up inside of people saying, I'm being called back to the land.
Okay, so what can you do today? Well, freedom starts in your kitchen. So create freedom in your kitchen. We start by getting the free from list. We remove all chemicals from our house. We cannot survive and thrive this if we have not detoxified. We cannot continue to put poison in our body and in our kids' body. We need to remove all of the addictive chemicals from our house and the addictive foods. So you can get the free from list, watch the docu-series that's also found at Freedom Kitchen Summit. Attend session 2. This Food Freedom series will run the next 12 weeks. Every other week, a new session with a week of replay. Have your kids take my cooking classes. I have so many parents that say, but my kids are picky eaters or my kids won't eat that. And I actually found the opposite. When they're in class and we empower them, they want to cook, they want to eat healthy. Many of my students actually cook for their family. So have your kids take some cooking classes, have them get off of processed food or convenience foods and become creative, because this starts moving us towards self-sufficiency. Stay tuned to this series. We're going to be bringing on other experts. I am not the expert in permaculture, but I know experts in permaculture or in gardening or in regenerative agriculture. And so we're going to get there. This 6-class series is intended to help everyone, regardless of where they are in their level of awareness, over the next 12 weeks in just 3 short months, for us to have an awareness with some action items and resources to move us in the direction of self-sufficiency. Please feel free to reach out to me, Lisa at freedomkitchensummit.com. Let me know your thoughts and your feedback on this. I'm truly doing this from my heart. Until next time.